Hey, welcome back to the Security Ledger podcast. I'm Paul Roberts, editor-in-chief at the Security Ledger. In this week's episode, we're speaking with independent security researcher and IoT hacker Dennis Giese. Dennis is one of the foremost researchers exploring the security of connected devices, in particular, robot vacuum cleaners. I really wanted to talk to Dennis because one of the things that I'm really interested in and focused on these days is the intersection between security research and what I consider to be the larger project of smart device liberation. As software has wormed its way into pretty much every type of modern appliance, consumers have benefited from amazing features, but software and always-on internet connectivity have also enabled abusive practices, such as mass commercial surveillance of consumers and de facto monopolies on things like service and repair. As Dennis notes in this podcast, even innocuous objects like robot vacuum cleaners are now bristling with cameras, microphones, and other sensors. Ostensibly, this is to enable features such as voice recognition and better navigation, but those sensors are a two-way street. A microphone lets us talk to our robot vacuum cleaners, but it also lets our robot vacuum cleaners listen to whatever we might happen to be saying. Dennis's work isn't so much about disabling these surveillance features as liberating the devices and the data they collect from the grips of manufacturers and giving it to the owners, whose data is to begin with. To start off our conversation, I asked Dennis to talk about how he got interested in hacking stuff. Like most of the prominent security researchers I've spoken with over the years, he told me that his curiosity about how things worked blossomed at a young age. Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is another episode of the Security Ledger podcast, and we're in the studio today talking with Dennis Giese. Dennis, welcome to Security Ledger podcast.
Okay, but I can be here. Thank you.
We're thrilled to have you here. So, Dennis, you are a noted and celebrated device hacker who is also really done some pretty amazing work around consumer devices and IoT. For our listeners, Dennis, who aren't familiar with you, just tell us a little bit about who you are and also like your journey into cyber.
Yeah, so I'm a security researcher in a way. So it started as my hobby, but it's nowadays my day-to-day business. I have a physics and electrical engineering background. So I went in Germany for school, was also in Boston, did like my cybersecurity degree there. And what I do daily is to basically disassemble and hack devices which are in some way or form connected to the internet. It can be cameras, this can be smart toilet seats, this can be vacuum robots, which are my specialty. This can be literally everything which has power and is connected to something. So I'm very curious about things. And the way how I generally started with all the hacking stuff was like when I was a kid, I was like 6 or 7 years old, I had like a computer and had some software on it, which was a trial version and didn't have internet. As a kid, you have a lot of time. And so I started to open with a hex editor, like some files and mess with them around and was able, after lots of work, to make it a full version. And this was like my first aha moment. And since then, I'm basically looking at interesting things. This can be also like logs. I do like lock picking, everything which is security related, where people build something to keep one out that kind of attracts me to get in.
Were your parents like in technology or engineers?
My parents were like more like in business and physics, with technology, but less. So my dad was like doing some IT stuff. So he brought me like old computers from work, which were way older than I was. So this was a good thing to play around. And so I learned like all the technologies from zero, basically. So it took a lot of time until I had some graphical interface in my life. I was like working with DOS, it was working with Linux, so all kind of.
One of the questions I love asking folks like Dennis is how they approach a new challenge like hacking a robot vacuum cleaner. That's because their answers to those questions have a lot of clues for companies about where the security risks in their devices are and how best to harden them against attacks. So here's what Dennis had to say when I asked him about how he went about hacking robot vacuum cleaners. If you were talking to someone who was maybe new to this topic, interested in doing security research into Internet of Things devices, what would your advice to them be? And what's your approach as you look at a new IoT device? Like how to approach it from a security standpoint?
Devices are extremely interesting if you think about that, they are like device in your home which has access to particular data, which has cameras, which can do control things in your home. Please connect to the internet and you don't see the inner workings. In contrast, like if you have a MacBook or like a desktop where you can click around things, it's like it's completely opaque to you. And these kind of devices become cheaper and cheaper all the time, right? Last week we had, or this week we had actually Amazon Cyber Monday and Black Friday and everything, and lots of connected devices. And this can be literally everything. I saw light bulbs were one of the first things which I saw at some point, which makes sense. But nowadays it's even the trash cans are internet connected, right? And from that aspect, because it's like everywhere around us, one of the things which I'm always asking myself, okay, so how did they do it? So I try to get the device, I try to disassemble it and try to see, okay, how is it done? And so for someone who starts also like from nothing or is interested in the topic, this is like most of the time the case where, you just need to swallow the bitter pill of getting a device and assemble it and look into it, or you might find sources with pictures from inside. But most of the time you want to touch a device. And the cool thing with that is typically as soon as you touch a device, and there's only very rare cases where you don't get success, right? But it eats more time. That's a big disadvantage of that. Many people think it's like a 9 to 5 job, but most of the time you need to be reading a lot of things and just play around. It takes forever.
You're best known, Dennis, as the guy who hacks robotic vacuum cleaners. Of course, robot vacuum cleaners are just another IoT device, but how did you get specifically interested in robot vacuums, and how far back does this go with you? How long have you been looking at this particular category of IoT device?
Heck no, lawnmowers too, because lawnmowers are like vacuum robots, but just with knives.
Just a robot vacuum with teeth, basically.
Yeah.
That's the
just a little bit bigger. But actually, surprisingly, if I look at my security kind of career, the vacuum interface. So I started in 2006 and 2017, and first I had this completely dumb vacuum robot, which was just like a random ball driving around and doing nothing. But at some point, I saw some ads of where vendors said, "Oh yeah, we have this cool technology like LiDAR. We have free processors. We have this very powerful hardware." I was looking in forums and everything. People try to install like custom sound packages on them, but no one had really success. And I was like wondering, okay, what's the hype in there? This was like a completely new field, but no one touched it before. So I think I was lucky on that. And then we got one of these devices and started to assemble it, looked at it, tried to figure out like, hey, can I do something to that in sense of get access? One thing which was helpful to me is that they use the same processor of like devices which I had before, like something like a Raspberry Pi like device. So I had some experience with that. This was very helpful. And yeah, and the other day I used like aluminum foil or aluminum foil, like how the Americans say, to get under one of the chips shorted and basically do a port injection. And with some more tricks, I had like root access. And this was my first talk at the CCC and the Chaos Communication Congress in Germany in 2007. And then from there is, okay, they bring out new products. And then I looked like, okay, how did they develop to the same things still work? Because the whole robot market obviously develops. Like they started with just dumb robots, then they had LiDAR, then they had at some point no cameras, then mopping functions. Now we have microphones. So it's like a developing market which kind of keeps giving on the in a particular way. So there's always something new. And that kind of keeps me going. Now I have, I think, a collection of 60 robots. This is both vacuum robots and lawnmowers. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's like an addiction in a way.
Your carpets must be very clean.
I have one floor, but yeah, I only use one of them, by the way. So the others are like in shelf or like for experiments. And through all this development, one thing is I didn't realize how much effort it would be, but I maintain a kind of like a software or like information for people to look at things. And I get every day between like 1,500 requests from people where, okay, they have like this and this robot. They want to kind of know, okay, can you route it? What kind of data is it saving? Or I get like requests from people, and this is important for you in a way where the device stopped working after 1 year and 2 months. So exactly out of the warranty. And hey, it's a very way to figure out like what's going on with this device and fixable. And yeah, and all the kind of things, right? I get completely random requests from people which don't have rooted devices, but typically help people which have rooted devices. But I get also nowadays a lot of requests from people, from normal consumers, which said, hey, I tried to talk to the vendor to get this thing repaired, and they just ignored me. Did you see that before? Is there anything I can do to test and everything? Which is it's a little bit tricky in the sense of if you talk to normal non-technical persons, because we have a lot of understanding of our mission in a way, but I try to help as much as I can. But the life of an open source maintainer is difficult. it doesn't pay well, it doesn't pay at all.
What do these vacuums look like under the hood? You mentioned Raspberry Pi and like from a hardware and software perspective, do you see a lot of similarities between different makes and models of vacuum cleaners, or are they all bespoke?
Okay, so all of them are similar. There's some companies which are slightly different, like iRobot in particular. But most of the robots, they more or less using, they have a quad core or like octa core CPU, like an ARM CPU, just like the class standard thing. They have like between 512 to 2 GB or 4 GB of RAM and some flash storage, which can differ a little bit. And surprisingly, most of the companies, if you look like, for example, Roborock, this was like one of the first ones we started with, the hardware didn't change much in the last 5 years, or 5 or 6 years. And this is more or less the case for all companies. So that's one of the reasons why if one of the robot companies, you know, all of them in a particular way. And when I was giving like my talk this year, I was able to basically route 4 different companies, right? So Roborock, Dreamy, which is like a US company, Shark Robots, and Xiaomi, obviously. So like, you can apply the same kind of vulnerabilities to multiple of them. Software-wise, they run most of the time on Linux and WRT. All of the companies use Chinese manufactured chips. And many companies, even if they have different names, they are fabless manufacturers. So they buy IP cores from some companies, put them together on a chip and manufacture the chip. And so in most cases, if you find like one vulnerability in one, like the IP cores for many things. The tricky part is to disclose that.
One of the big messages that Dennis has for all of us and that we should all keep in mind is that manufacturers like the ones that make robot vacuum cleaners are engaged in a kind of deception. Namely, they foist new models of their vacuums on the marketplace that are nearly identical under the hood to previous models. The changes in new robot vacuum models is almost entirely software based. The hardware is almost identical to previous versions. In this part of the conversation, we talk about that. That discussion prompted me to ask Dennis what he thought the actual business model of robot vacuum cleaner makers is.
And you mentioned to me that for consumers, often if you're buying the latest model of whatever robot vacuum, in all likelihood, that is the same hardware as the earlier model. What's changed is just the software features that they've delivered on it, maybe some new sensors or something like that.
Yeah. But quite often the case, as soon as a product is like released and it's in the market and they started to optimize the software, they realize, okay, we can cut down a little bit on like RAM, on flash, and just get away with less. But it's like a standard thing, which you see also for other devices. I see it also for Amazon Echoes, which are also rooted and hacked. It's one of the ways how companies can, you know, generate income, because obviously as soon as they sold to the vacuum robot, they got your money and they don't earn money with you anymore. So basically from there on, you're like the cost. So what we try to do is basically release like a new model, which kind of is only just changed a little bit, but looks like completely new from like a consumer perspective and with new features for obviously new price. So they get the money again. While if you look under the hood, it's basically mostly software changes, which they could have ported to all the devices, but they have obviously no financial interest to do that.
It's funny because when you look on the list of all the robots, vacuum robots you've worked on going back, whatever it is now, 8 years, right? So many of them are end of support, end of life, EOS, EOL, which means that the vendor has stopped issuing software updates, including security patches for these devices, stop issuing software updates. Two questions. First of all, as a vacuum owner, what does it mean practically when they EOL the device in terms of maintaining it, patching it? What does that really mean as the vacuum owner when the manufacturer has ended support? And what are your options at that point?
One thing which I did mention before, but most of the robots nowadays are based on Ubuntu 14.04. So the kernels are extremely old. And this part of the reason is many of the companies started from like an open source software, which they got inspired of, let's say so. And that software was, whoever developed the software initially, they stopped the development like in 2016 or so. And it requires particular libraries and some other stuff. So it only runs on their Ubuntu 14.04. The kernel versions are like massively old, even for new devices. If you buy today one, it still has the kernel version from, about 4 or 5 years ago. With a Go device, it's a tricky question because typically these devices don't expose too many interfaces. If you look at the threat model of like vacuum robots or like IoT devices, typically nowadays, it's more like either you have local attacks, so someone is in your local network, or the vendor gets hacked and then you're screwed no matter what, right? One thing which is important for why you want to have firmware updates is that they find quirks like in navigation, for example, and we see that quite often with vacuum robots, that they fix their machine learning model, they fix a couple of random things where the road behaves weirdly. And so if you don't get firmware updates, then obviously you don't get them. The same cases for if they add features. And for example, the first generation of Xiaomi robots, they couldn't save the map. So they could see the map, but they explored the apartment every time they were running through. And then with one of a year after that, they introduced for newer models, actually saving that they could save the map so that you could just point the robot and it just goes there. But the hardware for both of these robots, which were released, is exactly the same. We have just a different case, but they never backported like the feature back. I have now questions like, hey, from a perspective of the owner, hey, do I spend $600 again for basically the same product in a different case with some software features on? In the ideal case, we would export the same thing if the hardware supports it, but obviously we drop the support after typically a year, after 2 years, something like that.
Well, what is the business model of these robot vacuum makers as you understand it? Is it harvesting data from folks' homes and reselling it, or what's going on? Why are they adding all these cameras and mics to floor vacuums?
There's two things. So one thing is so evolution wise, had to be very, very dumb robots like back then, like before 2016, which would have the bumper sensors, maybe some infrared sensors, where we were bumping everywhere and we were driving around a little bit randomly. And then at some point, people figured out that you can build a lidar, like laser, which kind of rotates the tower in the back over there, this tower thing, but you can build it fairly cheaply. So a lot of robots started to get lidar tower, but they used back then primarily ultrasonic sensors for the front, so to detect like objects on the front. And just look, if you just assemble it, it reminded me a little bit of these kids robot sets, which you could buy like a couple of years ago, where you put like a Raspberry Pi into it, you put some tires on it, you put like a camera, and like have this cheap ultrasonic sensor, but basically it was a nicer package, but it was basically the same hardware. Back when we were like, so we have something driving around in your home, how can we get cool data? And lidar, like data is not as cool. It's a map of your apartment, okay, but it would be cooler to have some more impactful thing. And so we tried to use the ultrasonic sensor as a microphone, because what most people don't know is in most cases, you can use any speaker also as a microphone. So there's ways how you can mess with, if you have them plugged in your computer, there's particular ways how you can abuse them as microphones, basically, to listen to people. But it didn't work back then. At some point, we started to evolve more. We got cameras. Some companies figured out it's LiDAR is too expensive, so cameras cost only half of that. So they try to use cameras. But also, since a lot of people got vacuum robots, there was the case where, if you look on Reddit, there's a lot of robots where the robots were driving through dog poo and spreading it out very thinly through the whole apartment, and which was
I see this.
Yeah. And so a lot of companies started to use the cameras to detect that. And one thing which I noticed is that it's not necessarily what the companies actually develop this kind of things, but the chip vendors like in Rockchip or Qualcomm, they have use cases for their chips that they sell. And at some point we have integration of the cameras and integration of other things. And then that's down into the companies, which is gonna, and yeah. And from there, nowadays we have microphones for smart speakers in a way. So the robots are like smart speakers. You can tell, hey, go there into the clear space.
What's the business? What do you think the business vacuum makers is?
It depends. I think in China, it's primarily they want to sell the hardware. So they primarily kind of business models like selling the hardware. For US companies, and especially I think for iRobot, it's slightly different. They have their CEO at some point said, hey, yeah, we don't earn that much money with hardware, but we can sell map data of users to realtor companies, to whoever. And the development of cameras, you have the cases where we use AI machine learning already. So why not use AI machine learning to then detect more things in the apartment? And there's rumors, what I read online from journalists, it's not random Reddit users, where one of the use cases why Amazon wants to buy a robot, I think it's not true yet, they're still in the process of buying it, is that we can connect it, get the data, the user data, basically. But that's still the main primary worth of the company.
Okay. One of the things that you're really interested in is also these questions around repair and serviceability and how to liberate hardware so that users can continue to maintain and update it and in your own spirit, tweak it, modify it, adjust it to their own desires and likes. And you talk about jailbreaking these devices so that you can basically keep supporting them.
Mhm.
Talk about that a little bit. And also, have you had conversations with OEMs about that idea? Hey, users should be able to jailbreak these and keep using them even after you've decided to walk away from them.
Yeah, my primary mission with all of the IoT devices which I analyze is not necessarily, well, I mean, find bugs. I mean, obviously I find bugs, but to disconnect from the cloud because I don't necessarily trust the vendors. And it doesn't matter if they're like in China, if they're in America, both of them are like, it doesn't make a big difference, like from like a trust perspective.
Keep them from
And
uploading your data basically to the cloud too. Right?
yeah, but not only that, but the thing is there's companies which get bankrupt. There were like a couple of cases where the company went out of business and then they had to basically, garbage. Or they made a mistake where they didn't extend certificates, which I tried to use to get the jailbreak with different methods. Let's say it's not a very well-paying thing because over the time I realized, or like people told me like, hey, I could have made like $10,000, $100,000 worth of the vulnerabilities in the sense of like by reporting them to background. The thing is, most of the time, if I give presentations about how to root your jailbreak your devices, the vendors learn at the same point from this vulnerability as the people who are sitting in the talk. Because I don't tell them the vendors before that. But otherwise, they could just push a firmware update and just would defeat the purpose. But yeah, that's some primary things with this to disconnect the cloud and to find ways. And I was talking to many vendors, and I was invited by Xiaomi multiple times to China. I was in China, in Beijing. I was in Shenzhen. I was talking to Roborock with the CEO personally. I was talking to the vice CEO of Xiaomi. So I had the conversations back then, and it was like in 2018 actually. And so I told like the guy from Roborock, hey, I had a meeting with all the engineers and I was presenting them how I got in, and we were like, oh God. And I told them like, hey, look, the thing is, people are not really interested in going through a lot of pain to hack your devices. The primarily goal is to, run them locally and run them like Home Assistant or with any other personal smart home device, smart home thing. And if you have a way to run the devices locally only, and this will have the same functionality, then people like me wouldn't have any interest or like not much interest like to root your devices and to hack that. Back then they promised me like, yeah, we will have a method at some point, but users can run it locally. The problem is that never came. I continued my mission basically because the cloud mandatory basically. And as long as that's the case, and like I continue with that. I wouldn't say like necessarily like a mission, but a lot of vendors, we just don't understand like what drives us, right? In a way, hey, okay, it's great that you have this cloud and it's great that you have this weird cloud functionality, but let's say the trust is not there. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Chinese company or a US company. It's just that we want to run the stuff like autonomously, without relying like, hey, this thing doesn't work with your cloud. AWS breaks from time to time, right? Or like some other cloud systems break from time to time. And then people have to trouble with like IoT devices because we didn't run anymore. Just connect them.
Bounty programs and stuff like that.
Yeah. So Xiaomi does it. It doesn't do it necessarily, but there's like a lot of companies which do that. Again, the problem is I don't have an incentive. I have a financial incentive to submit it. I could get like $10,000 for a buck. But again, if I submit it, then you're bound to get, like you can talk about it like for 3 months or so, but you can't release it for a particular thing. And then by the time you can talk about it, they push already like an OTA update and basically locked you out. So it's like waste a lot of money by buying robots in the first place and not submitting bugs. But that's just like the mission, I guess. That's just the way how it is.
One of the strangest observations Dennis had was that his work hacking robot vacuum cleaners actually serves as a kind of PR for them, to the point that one robot vacuum maker complained to him after his talk at a conference that he wasn't hacking their hardware. The idea, as Dennis sees it, is that his posts promoting jailbreaks for robot vacuums that let people protect their data or modify the device are kind of unsanctioned features for those vacuums that attract people and boost sales, more even than if the OEM itself was privacy-centric from the start.
So generally, I think the vendors understand that these people want to have privacy, but I think we also understand that the group which is understanding how privacy works and like where privacy is very, very important is like very, very small. Liberate sells like millions of vacuum robots, and I think in our community, people which have rooted this device, I think we're around 45,000 nowadays, right? So it's like compared to the broad mass of people who have devices, it's not that big. And we're more worried about people or like other Chinese companies basically stealing the IP intellectual property. So that's why we lock things down. And not only that, I noticed after this DevCon that vendors are very slow at fixing things. So some stuff is like still open. And think that's because for them, it's a money. So basically by us hacking their devices and basically developing a software for them to run locally, that's for them like a free advertisement so that people buy exactly these devices. And that's a fun fact. After my talk I was in Germany at DEFCON for the Chaos Communication Camp, which is like a camping site. And there was one vendor, which was like the subcontractor of Shark Robot, which came to me and complained that I didn't hack them because it's like a free advertisement basically. Hey, it's so unfair, but Roborock, Xiaomi, Dreamy, and they get all the free advertisements. And not only that, it's like a selling point for officially we can't say that, but it's a selling point, obviously, that you can technically make them privacy secure in a way. And never realized that. I mean, hey, it's so unfair. They sell like 10,000s of devices just because of you guys.
They could always add that as a feature if they wanted, but let's not get crazy.
Yeah, but they actually have. So not Shark Robot itself, but the subcontractor, they have their own devices. The problem is it's marketing-wise, but it's publicity-wise, it's office value in a way. If people hack something, is hey, you can use this now for some cool thing. As if the company, no one talks about the company just because of a feature, but if some hackers give a talk at DEFCON, hey, oh, look at this, people how badly we implemented it, and now you can use the device for something, it gets more attraction than a company which is like privacy away from the beginning.
Which brings us to the final question I asked Dennis, which is what some of the vacuum hackers are doing with their devices once they've jailbroken them. Dennis's response is interesting, and it hints, I think, at the kind of pent-up creativity and market demands that are festering in the consumer marketplace right now. This is creativity that would be unleashed if manufacturers were required to give device owners the option of being able to jailbreak or tinker with their own property.
So you mentioned all the folks who message you and contact you based on your research. What are the customers out there using these devices looking to do with them that they're coming to you and saying, I need help rooting it, or could you help me out? What are the types of things that they are interested in doing with their vacuum?
So many people, they just want to have privacy and to run it with their own local software. So they have like home automation already set up for the blinds, for a lot of other things. So one of the standard examples that I get quite often is that people, as soon as they leave the apartment, the smart home system sees, according to the phone is not there anymore. So no one is home and they run the vacuum automatically and they come back home and the apartment is clean. Other cases is that people want to add custom soundbox to them, some GLaDOS from Photo G soundbox, which the vendors don't supply, obviously, or some other stuff. So you see a lot of YouTube videos of it's actually someone has written like a tool which is called Outer, where if the robot hits something, it would shout out. That was a huge thing. But I got also interestingly like cases from people who are architects and want to create from an empty apartment, like a map to kind of like a precise thing. The LiDAR is also very precise, right? So you have a device which costs a couple $100. You just clean the apartment once with that, and you have a map basically. So how to pull off the map. And one thing which I got recently, there were like some researchers which looked into fall detection for senior citizens, right? There was like cameras, and if they clean around every day, they might detect that a person is lying on the floor. And there have been like lots of cases where people were lying on the floor for days, still alive, and people look into fall detection like that. So yeah, it's a broad kind of case of people who want to do that. And most of the time they just want to have control over the device. And that's a huge driving factor.
Like pro-social features, right? Yeah, senior fall detection or apartment mapping. Like this thing can help me do things that I need to do apart from what it was designed to do. And it's mine, so I should be able to tell it to do that.
Yeah, it can do it definitely. So the thing is, it was powerful enough to do a lot of things. The question I guess is, do you want to have that in a sense of, I know, remember Blink had it or Amazon, but the camera products like a fall detection for seniors already integrate because you have a camera. So throw machine learning models on them and, detect them. But again, do you want to have that in your house, which the camera which looks inside and detects things?
In the off chance it catches you falling, the rest of the time it's just spying on everything in your apartment and telling Amazon about it, right?
Not only that, but so when I was in Australia, I could actually talk to some people from law enforcement. Hey, can you do this? Or what kind of data is stored on that? Because the thing is, if the device is not rooted, then you don't have access to the data, and it goes to China, and then obviously your US or Australian law enforcement, the European law enforcement wants to get data. Most of the time, the companies just tell them to pound sand. because nowadays the devices have like hardware security features. It's like extremely difficult for like forensic people to pull data because it's encrypted. So you need to be also very careful because they have self-destruct mechanisms and stuff. And yeah, so I get this question. I got, after my DevCode talk, actually, like someone came to me from one of the free letter organizations in the US and asked me like, hey, do you think we can use the vacuum robot and the camera to find people? And I was like, huh? Yeah, lots of people in China have them, right? Like, some of the robots have machine learning models for face detection for whatever reason. So some lawnmowers have that. So, but they detect if someone wants to steal it, if it's not the owner. But yeah,
Dennis, I feel confident somewhere in an office park in Virginia, someone is working on this product.
this is always like a problem also for me, for my website, for example, where you can download a custom firmware. You get like the firmware, right? So everyone who downloads the firmware can look for more vulnerabilities and see the best things which are remotely. And it's like always a double-edged sword because at one time you help people to make their device more disconnection from cloud, but on the other side you give a lot of people access to the robot so they can snoop around if there's anything else which you can abuse for spy on people.
Final question. And this, I'm involved in the right to repair movement. What do you think the actual useful life of a robot vacuum is? Totally, if we were to take off the software end of life, the kind of imposed death by the manufacturer, how long could you keep these devices running and operating? What is their useful life, in your opinion? And what would need to happen in order for people to use them for their full useful life?
So I can more or less answer this question very precisely. I can give you an at least time. And so devices which we initially rooted back in 2016, 2017, the first generation of Xiaomi robots, they were still today totally fine. The biggest thing which you get with time is like that the battery kind of gets weaker, but you can just replace the battery. Surprisingly, like for loose rustment, it's like just unscrew 5 screws. You need to break the warranty seal, but you can swap the battery because the battery packs which we use today are the same which we used years ago. So you can just swap them very easily. And these devices are surprisingly easy to repair if the parts are available. So it's a device which can probably look like 10 years or more. So it's potentially like the biggest kind of aspect. But other than that, I wouldn't see like any big parts which would break, like if it falls on the stair or something. So the useful life you can run from, I would assume for at least 10 years, maybe more. At some point you run to the issue that, by the way, if you buy a device today, like a vacuum robot, you will run into an issue at least in 2038. That's probably the next for many devices you can buy today. The Unix timestamps run out. So the kernels are, but we don't support only 32-bit of time. And with the time started in 1970 and the end time basically where you overflow again back to 1970s and at some date in 2038. Because we don't get firmware updates, we will definitely by then we will be dead in the sense that they will get confused, but they will be back in 2038. Sorry, 1970.
Wow. It wasn't Y2K, it was Y2038. We got it wrong.
Yeah, we'll see it for a lot of devices and for a lot of products and for a lot of software, which will get very confused in 2038. But yeah, I think, like I said, this device is surprisingly easy to repair. The problem which you run into, and this is like, I always love to watch like Louis Rothman videos, like when he was in New York and got MacBooks. MacBook is like way more expensive than a vacuum robot. I mean, vacuum robots here you can buy for $300, $400, $500. And then the question is like, okay, I mean, in theory you could repair it, but the product which, I mean, is financially viable to get spare parts for and like pay someone to repair it. So it's like, it gets over like economical question.
Dennis, it's been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for coming on Security Ledger podcast and talking to us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me here.
Where can people see you talk? When are you going to be speaking next?
So I submitted a talk to the Chaos Communication Congress, which is end of the year. I don't know yet if it got accepted. In Germany, yeah. I submitted a couple more talks. So CCC is typically the Chaos Communication Congress. They release the videos very quickly. For some other venues, it's like a little bit slower. You find most of the videos online or have also on my website with all the other materials. So I have the talk list. But if people have questions, you can just hit me up. It might take a little bit longer. It depends on what the question is to answer because I get so many, but I'm always happy to talk to people, especially just researchers. So I feel people are interested doing the thing, I'm more than happy to talk to.
And we will provide your contact information when we post the podcast. All right, Dennis Giese, thank you so much for coming in and speaking to us. And we'll do this again, okay?
Sure.
So that brings to an end this episode of the Security Ledger podcast. Thanks to Dennis Giese for coming in and talking to us about his work on robot vacuum cleaners. Keep an eye on your feed. We've got more Security Ledger podcast episodes scheduled for 2024, more great interviews coming up, and I look forward to seeing you all again.